the Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm Steven Zagash, along with my co-host, Tulio Siragusa, and we've got a special guest today we'll introduce in a moment. So empathy continues to emerge as one of the most important leadership capabilities in today's workplace. According to Catalyst research, employees with highly empathetic leaders report significantly higher levels of engagement, innovation, and retention. And at the same time, many leaders operate in this fast-paced, high-pressure environments where performance expectations are high and communication is constant. And in those moments, empathy can be overlooked, even though that's when it often makes the biggest difference. And today, we are exploring what empathy in leadership looks like in practice, especially in environments where stakes are high and communication matters the most. And Tulio, introduce our special guest today.
Very happy to introduce our guest today. Our guest today is Steph Porter. She's the founder of Ink&Iron PR. Steph has more than 15 years of experience across public relations, corporate communication, and social media. She has led multi-million-dollar campaigns for major brands, including Walmart, New Balance, Playtex Baby, and Tim Hortons. She has also held in-house leadership roles at Canadian Tire Corporation and SpartanNash, where she oversaw executive communication, national media strategy, and high-stakes crisis response. Known for her fearless storytelling, sharp instincts, and relentless follow-through, Steph is also recognized for her empathy-driven leadership style and her ability to build strong, high-performing teams in demanding environments. Steph, welcome to the Bliss Business Podcast. Looking forward to speaking with you today.
Thanks for having me. What a great intro.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to some fearless storytelling here.
Yeah.
So, Steph, empathy, it's often discussed in leadership, but it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So kind of what's it mean to you as far as leadership, and how does, it look like in action in your world?
Yeah. So, there's many different, as you said, there's many different definitions of empathy and people have different perspectives. My own perspective of it is truly understanding people and learning to lead them through how you understand them and how they operate. For me, I always say this to people. I'm always like, it's all about listening, not just hearing people, but actually listening to them, actively listening and taking what they're saying and actually taking it into consideration and acting on it. So I feel like there's a few things as a PR leader that are super important to me when it comes to empathy. So one of the things is, you sensing when your team is stretched before they have to say anything. So really understanding when somebody is feeling that itch or feeling that that they're underwater, knowing that before they can even tell you. So being 2 steps ahead of your people, knowing when, and this is from a client management perspective, knowing when a client needs, reassurance and needs like a pat on the back and just needs a friend rather than a push, right? Like we can be hard. PR people can be hard. But it's about knowing when those times are that you need to be hard versus when you need to be a little bit, softer. And you recognize when a moment calls for speed and when you need to take a pause, which in my opinion, this is something that I'm always working on, is taking a pause. I'm very quick. That's why I love PR. I'm very quick. And so for me, I always make sure that I'm taking a pause before I engage with, people who work for me, people who, are stakeholders, executives, clients, whomever. That's something that I'm very intentional with. So I think a lot of it too is I feel very sensitive, especially with team. Like you need to make your people happy first before you make anybody else happy. That's my perspective. That your team needs to feel safe with you. They need to feel that they need to trust you. And so all of these go hand in hand with empathy. And I mean, we're going to go into trust and authenticity and all of these things later on. But I think that it's important to really focus on those things when you're talking about empathy and leadership.
Yeah, and I think a lot of leaders kind of focus on how can I get more out of people. I mean, that's like that's the question they're asking all the time, right? And it's
yeah.
But it's cyclical, right?
Someone's super productive. You're like, wow, they're so productive, but there's a tax that comes with that.
Yeah.
And
it's cyclical.
That bill always comes due. You just don't see it. And if you're not, I love the fact that you tuned into that, because ultimately empathy is an anticipation of what could happen next. Like if someone's going 100 miles a second constantly, they're going to eventually get tired.
Yeah.
And so if you're like, this is so awesome, they get all the stuff done, but you don't like, hey, listen, can you take a couple of days, take a break? You know, like I got you covered. I don't think enough people do that. So they talk about empathy, but like you're saying, it's really anticipating when someone needs something before they even realize that they need it. That's probably the hardest part. But the question here is, you know, sometimes we are faced with pressures and tight timelines, especially in the work you've done. I mean, you've worked in environments where timing matters, the messaging matters, the execution, and the timeliness of the execution is critical. And you also mentioned you deal with crisis, so I'm sure that's got its own challenges and timelines and sort of the need for moving fast, right? But how do you maintain empathy while also meeting those high expectations and deadlines? Because that's sometimes challenging.
Yeah, short answer, it's incredibly hard. It's taken, I mean, I have 15 years of experience and I'm still learning. You know, there were moments early on in my career where, you know, before I had kids, I was like working. All I wanted to do was work. So I would be on the computer late at night. I'd be, answering emails at all hours of the evening. And then I'd be frustrated that people wouldn't be responding to me. And so I'm like,
you won't respond to me at 2 a.m. What's wrong with you?
What are you doing? How are you sleeping? We're in the middle of a crisis. But no, I learned a lot after I had kids, because you have to understand that people have other priorities, obviously. And for me, I think, pace and speed, super important in PR. I'm not going to say that it's not, but it doesn't always equal performance. It doesn't always equal success. And so leading with empathy, especially in times of crisis, taking that minute for a pause and just making sure that you are going to be either issuing the right statement, that you are taking people's feelings and attitudes, that's us all people's, that's internal people's, external people's, everybody, into consideration. That is in the long run going to be more successful for you. And I actually have an example. In the last year, this time last year, when I was still working on the corporate side, we had what no person, not just PR person, what no person wants to have to experience. And that was an in-store shooting. And I've never experienced anything. I've experienced crisis. I've managed crisis in my past, but I never had to deal with that. And so, ultimately, and not only was it a shooting, but one of our employees was killed and a customer was killed. Oh. So there were fatalities. And so in those moments, you feel that obviously you have to jump on it super quickly. But there's also an element of human, like you need to look deep and understand what is going to be the most human way that we can deal with this right now. And so one of the things that I recommended was, so I think it happened on a Tuesday. I said, the executives immediately, like tomorrow, need to go to that location. We as PR people need to be boots on the ground at that location, which was about 2.5 hours away. So we made the drive there, and we pretty much just did everything from there. And there was a memorial that day on the Wednesday, like the day after. So right very soon after. And so we made sure that all the executives were there. They were with their people. They were with the families of those who were affected. And it was very human. It was very human. Nothing, that was the most people first way that we could do that in that moment. And so for me, I feel like a lot of companies, a lot of leaders would sort of instantly jump to, well, what does that mean for us as a company from a financial standpoint or from an insurance standpoint, or all of these things that are so technical. And for me personally and for the team, it's very much the people and the human aspect of it first. And so that's just one example, but I
What's
think
interesting.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that, like, so you mentioned having kids, you're able to be empathetic now with families, right? And coworkers that have families, but you never had like a shooting situation. There's going to be situations where you've never had something like this to draw on experience. And, I always say, when you don't know what to do, do the loving thing. And like you were just saying, yeah, we just need to show up as humans. We've never gone through this. We just need to show up as humans. What's that look like?
Yep. And, for me, I think a lot of it is, I go a lot with my instinct. I think that comes a lot with, time and, experience and just understanding people. Like, I actually love people. And I'm not afraid of people. And so in all of my time, I've sort of gleaned insights into how people operate. And I would say that's a little bit of a superpower. A lot of PR folks' superpower is just understanding people. And so I think you just have to listen to that voice, that instinct, while obviously still maintaining clarity, transparency, all of these other practical things that, a lot of leaders do, but it's just really leaning into that gut instinct of, what is the human thing to do here?
Yeah. That's the most, what you really want is people to be authentic, right?
Absolutely.
You don't, like you were talking about, they could think about insurance. They could think about all these other, 10 different things.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, we need to show up authentically. And from a PR standpoint, right? That's, people kind of understand at some point, yeah, you're human. You're going through this in a way that's not always going to be clean and pretty. It's a messy situation.
Absolutely.
I think it's also part of just being aware that no matter what business you're in, whether you're a B2B business or a B2C business, really at the end of the day, we're all in the people-to-people business. It's not machines that are buying things or selling things. It's people. Even in a digitized AI world, there's still people that are going to consume, whether it's product or service. And so to not be aware of that and to just focus on the business continuity and such, well, the continuity is tied to people's experience. And people don't just buy for the sake of a transaction. That can happen anywhere. They're not going to, if you need to buy a suit, you can buy that anywhere.
Absolutely.
But maybe I'm looking for a certain experience that only that store offers. And maybe that's the place that showed up very humanly in a crisis and earned my trust, because I feel like that's a place where people are going to be treated like people.
Absolutely.
So in your opinion, what role does self-awareness play in empathetic leadership?
Oh, it's huge. You as a leader, you have to be, you're setting the stage for your people, right? So I always say, be vulnerable. I am very much the type of person who, with my team members, if I don't know the answer to something, I am very transparent. And if I know that I didn't do something as great as I should have, or handled something as great as I should have, I am very much the first to admit it. And I'm also very pro, feedback. So we are, it's very much top-down feedback. That's what we're sort of programmed to do. We give feedback to our employees, and that's sort of it. But with the companies that I've been at, and sort of what I do now, is it's very much a 360 feedback approach. If there is a management style that one of my employees prefers, I'm open to it and will try my best to adapt. And I think that that's really important. You need to set the stage. You need to set the precedence as a leader to be vulnerable, to be transparent if you want your team to be the same way. You can't expect your team to be that way and not be that way yourself. So I think self-awareness is, super important.
Yeah, I think that vulnerability, some leaders get caught up, not trying to avoid that as much as possible when it's actually one of the most connecting things you can do with your team. And then you mentioned feedback. It's interesting. So like according to Harvard Business Review, organizations that embed communication and feedback into their operating systems are significantly more effective at building trust and alignment. So, empathy, it's often seen as kind of this personal thing, but it can be supported by systems.
Yeah.
And this is, we love to talk about systems here. We want to go from, random acts of kindness to systemized acts of kindness. With things. So we love diving into anything related to, what kind of structures or practices have you seen that help empathy show up consistently in leadership and communication?
I mean, I don't want to systemize it too much, because I feel like when you start to systemize it, it becomes inauthentic, right? So it becomes performative. So there's a fine line. Obviously, I think there's some things that companies and organizations and teams should implement. And so, in my last corporate role, we had daily check-ins. We had daily team check-ins every day at 8 a.m. Every day before the day started, we would have daily check-ins, which seemed like it was a lot, but it was great for us to all just connect and just get on the same page from a task point of view, right? But other than that, you have, feedback loops. With my team members, I would have one-on-ones with them weekly, but I was always very much like, if there is something that you need to talk to me about immediately, like, let's talk. You don't need to schedule a meeting. You don't need to, we don't need to wait for our one-on-one. Let's just chat. And so I think a big part, and, a lot of people disagree with me about this. This is a little bit of a hot take, but I think, especially in PR, you are more successful as a team and in terms of understanding each other when you're together. So in person, outside of just on Teams or Slack, whatever you want to do. So for me, I think it's important as far as systems, if you're a remote team, to make sure that you're setting up regular times, whether it's quarterly, whether it's monthly, weekly, whatever, to connect with people, because you're not going to get that same connection behind a computer screen. You're just not. And so I always say, like, whenever somebody starts a new job, to go into the office, if it's a hybrid model, go into the office every day. When you first start a job, go into the office every day, because you want to get to know people. You want to get to know their systems. You want to get to know them. And I feel very strongly about that. And especially in PR, when we are constantly in high pressure moments, you want to know the people that you're working with and understand the people that you're working with. And I think that the best way to do that is to be in person. So I would say, from a systems perspective, to try and make sure you're in person as much as possible.
Yeah, I was going to say, is this a hot take? I'm all, wow, yeah, it kind of is.
It is. A lot of people do not like my take, and that's okay. That's their opinion, but it's okay.
We're trying to figure this thing out post-COVID, where we know, like, this remote working, it's just not kind of the same, and so we're trying to do hybrid stuff, and even that, it's been a clunky process, precisely because of kind of what you're pointing out. It's like, especially if you're new, it's hard to absorb stuff. It's hard to, talk about the random stuff that, when you're going to go fill your coffee cup up or whatever, that just comes up, to get to know people.
How are you going to trust someone that you really don't know? And I feel like, so I'm also a professor. So I teach our next generation of folks who are coming into the world of PR in the next few years. And they are all so nervous to be in person with people. And so I'm like, you are missing out. There's so much great to that. And so I just say be in person as much as possible, at least for the first little bit, so that you can get to know people and trust people and feel safe with people. Feel safe with people is another big one too.
So in the business you're in, right? Communication, messaging is everything. And so I'm just curious, because sometimes, especially in a crisis, there's this misalignment that happens with some companies. Like they'll say one thing, but then internally there's something else going on, right? So how do you handle that misalignment where sometimes there's multiple stakeholders involved and the external messaging is not necessarily aligned with reality? It's not always genuine, but you have to fix the problem. So do you help your clients through that alignment? Is this something that comes up more or less these days? What have you seen?
More. I would say it's more prominent now. And I feel like I work with a lot of small, like founders, small businesses, and it's flashy. It's flashy to get a whole bunch of external PR and, have your name in, I don't know, the New York Times or whatever it is. But I think what a lot of companies forget to do first is do the inner work and really establish, what their mission is, their why are they doing what they're doing, and creating that story internally first and really getting it right. And then sharing it with the world. I think that and I've done both. I've been on agency side and I've been in corporate, and neither is easier. They both have their pros and their cons. And with corporate, there's a lot of stakeholders, and there's people who maybe don't really understand what PR and external, what they don't really understand it. And so a lot of it is educating. It's educating, stakeholders like, legal, HR, all these folks, and working with them to establish, like, let's say, for instance, we're working on, there's a crisis and we're working on a media statement, working with them and sort of educating them and counseling them on the type of messaging that we need to put together. And it all works out. It's sometimes more difficult than others, but the more you have processes in place, if you're an already established company, so there's like two, there's, the small businesses that I talked about, that they just need to figure out their mission and their why. Then there's the bigger companies, the corporate companies that have their mission, they have their why, but they need to have their processes in place that when things happen, this is step-by-step process on how we're going to react, right? So the more you have pre-existing processes set in place, the easier it is to take a message internally and take it externally.
Yeah, that's kind of, I know you brought up at the beginning of this discussion, talking about it, you don't want it to be, even though you've got these systems, you don't want them to be inauthentic when you're prompting people to do certain things. But we have the same sort of problem in the, we do the digital marketing and all that. It's that you don't want a message that's out there that is just not backed up by the experience of when dealing with that company. We could tell a great story, right? But when people actually experience that company, everything you've done, it'll fall flat. But if you can do that work where you're getting that internal alignment, prior to being able to tell the story, that'd be ideal. It just does not happen. So I feel like we're now moving into more of that area where we're really diving into, like you said, the company's why. We can lead from that area.
Yeah.
It's kind of like children. You said something interesting before about how children change you. I think children are the greatest teachers. They teach you everything you need to see about yourself.
Absolutely.
They're a mirror. They're a mirror. The good and the ugly, they're a mirror. So
they do.
But like children, right? You can't tell them do as I say, not as I do, because they're going to copy what you do, whether they see it or not, whether you hide it from them or not.
Absolutely.
They're going to do more of that. And I think sometimes that's the misunderstanding that people have around marketing or advertising or PR, because they'll think it's spin. It's not spin. It's about being authentic to who you are. So it only lands as real if you live it. If you're just spinning it, it's performative. And people can tell when it's performative, it's not real. It doesn't resonate with them.
They can. And with social media now, and with, all of these platforms where internal is starting to become external, like take for example that the CEO of Miller Knoll a couple of years ago, I don't know if you guys remember that, but she went viral on a company-wide town hall that was internal only. She made a comment that was something along the lines of, I don't want pity parties for anybody who's not getting a bonus, essentially. And it went everywhere. And so if you are a company that is preaching, people culture, people this, people that externally, you need to pretend that even in internal moments that that can go external. It will. There's always, there's always a possibility that that's going to go external. So I think that there's many different examples, that we can talk about, but you just have to be so careful, and you need to be authentic, and whatever you are practicing externally, you should be doing it internally, and vice versa.
That's the nice thing about being authentic. You don't have to pretend, right? Just live it. Steve and I actually did a number of shows where we analyzed where companies just really, really messed up, like got fined in the tune of billions of dollars for taking shortcuts. And we were like, if they were empathetic and they could have done actually a lot of good by just focusing their energy on doing the right thing, really, like the system. Like, why?
The two big areas of that, when we were going through all these companies where they had these scandals, the two big areas where I felt, when we analyzed this, where it fell apart was purpose. They didn't really have a clearly defined why that would have helped align whatever controversy they got into. They did not live it at all. And then it's like we talked about, the feedback loops. They didn't want to hear it, or it wasn't, it was discouraged, all that. So things just go sideways if you don't have those two key elements, which we've talked about here.
And some of those brands did not recover from that.
No.
Some of these things you do not recover from. It's not worth it. I mean, there's plenty of data out there that suggests do the right thing, straighten things up. Speaking of purpose, PricewaterhouseCoopers did a research, and they showed that 79% of employees say purpose is a key factor in their job satisfaction. People don't want to just work somewhere for a paycheck. Yes, it's necessary, but they'll stay because they feel like there's meaning behind what they're doing. They stand for something. Now, in communication, purpose often shapes how an organization shows up, both internally and externally. How does purpose influence the way you approach leadership and storytelling? And from a personal perspective, like, what's your own company's purpose?
So purpose for me is like, it's mission. Purpose and mission are integrated for me. It's the same thing. So I feel like this really anchors, leadership, storytelling, everything that I start with, with a new client, or even with, people who I work with, it starts with the purpose and the mission. And so, prepping executives for media interviews, looking at social media content, all of these things, does it go back to the purpose and the mission? And if it doesn't, then we need to figure out what will. And we need to change it. We need to tweak it. And so for me, I am all about, bold storytelling. I want to take risks. But I'm also, I'm very much like very much human-centered. So that's why this podcast is so great for me, is because I am very much human-centered, empathetic, people first. That is something that I really want to strive to emulate in everything that I do from a business perspective. And so I want to make sure that the people that I work with, like client-wise, that it makes sense for me from a business standpoint. The people that I work with, it makes sense for me from a business mission standpoint. All of these things. And I think that the mission ultimately creates some sort of alignment, right? So, especially in high pressure work, which we are so consumed with on the day to day, it gives us that why, and it gives us the reason why we do this. And I'm sure it's the same for you guys. Like, you're having a super hectic week. You're like, okay, no, but this is why we're going to go back to the why, or we're going to go back to the mission. It all is for the greater good. So I try and just lean into that and just keep thinking about the mission whenever I feel like, my mental state is getting far away and I'm having a hectic week. I sort of go back to that mission and I hone in and I'm like, okay, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is what keeps me grounded. And I try and, do the same thing when I work for executives, founders, and companies as well.
How do you, we kind of have this problem a little bit from time to time. We bring on a client. Obviously, we try to make sure we're kind of aligned with them, but sometimes you aren't totally aligned, and that's fine. That's a good challenge for us, for us to grow and our account executives to grow. When you work with executives and leadership teams, how do you help those leaders to communicate, with authenticity when maybe it's not always there, within the organization? And how do you kind of push them along to finding that North Star, I think, in this process, so that eventually they can get there? Because I know we bring on clients and they're in all stages of their business maturity and growth, and how they view, and the maturity of how they view capitalism and everything. And so it's like, okay, here's where they're at. We kind of need to push them in this direction or that. How do you navigate that?
And some are definitely more outspoken than others, which can be challenging. So for me, I start with anybody that I'm working with. And even when I was working in corporate, I am a firm believer that you need to know these people. Okay. So if you're going to be putting these people in front of a top tier, media outlet, you need to know what they like, what they do, what interests them, what doesn't interest them, all these things. So, again, maybe a little bit of a hot take, but I feel like I try and get to know these people as personally as I can. And I ask them all the questions like, how many siblings do you have? Where did you grow up? What do you like? Are you married? Do you have kids? What's like? I ask everything. Nothing is off the table, really. I try and get to know them as much as I can. And so I sort of get an understanding of their personality, and I pair that with, okay, the mission, and the purpose. How do we take your specific personality and how do we convey these messages that are going to be authentic for your purpose and your mission? So it's sort of like, it's a little bit of its own art form, but once you get a solid understanding of who these people are, you can kind of guide them in the direction of, key messages and what they should say, what they shouldn't say. Sometimes they don't always listen and they sort of go off on their own, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. Mm-hmm. So, and another thing is, a lot of folks forget that nothing is ever off the record. And I sort of alluded that earlier, when people, whether you're internal or whether you're external, you have to assume that everything that you are saying is going to be videoed and put on social media. So one thing, I've also,
people, this is the way to live these days, is
just assume that
all the time that your life is hacked, and you're and be honest.
Yeah. And so that's my
big thing. Doxing laws, nobody's paying attention to them. Nobody cares.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of executives too are sometimes a little too like cavalier, and will just sort of like go off on tangents and share whatever. And it's like, no, it's great that you're so authentic, but you need to just like rein it in a bit. There have been so many interviews where executives will be there and I'll be behind the computer and I'll be like, stop. But that's what we do. So it's a very fine balance. You have to try and find what's authentic for these folks, but
and
also
yeah, and I love that point. Like you said, the art form, it is like finding their interests and trying to be able to tie that in somehow. This is how you get that authenticity, is like, because they'll light up about something that they're interested in, and that's authentic. And can you, I mean, that's what you're talking about, the art form, and that's where the brilliance is there. That's what's really smart about trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
we'll say it's not a hot take. That's a smart take. So
thanks.
Sadly, there are some who so think that they'll just open up about everything, but not everybody's ready to receive it too that way. So that's you have to be aware of the fact that not everyone's ready to receive that pure authenticity that you might be doing from a place in your heart that's pure, but and not everybody's ready to be present that way, because to be present is to be there without judgment, and people are always judging everything you're saying. So you got to be aware of that. That goes back to that idea of self-awareness, and also awareness that not everyone is at that level. Not everyone's prepared to so that's a real thing. You have to prepare yourself for.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about purpose, how does that show up? How does purpose help show up in a time of crisis and uncertainty? Because usually that's when everything goes out the window, right? It's like, put that on hold, we got to fix this, right? So does it help? What's been your experience to stay focused on?
I think this is where you better be about it.
Yeah.
You better be about that.
Well, we know that. I'm just curious what your experiences with brands.
Well, it becomes the anchor, right? So, back to the example that I used before, the horrific shooting incident, the company that I worked for was a people first organization. That was the purpose. That was the mission, right? People first. So when in moments of crisis, when you are, trying to figure out how you want to proceed, what type of messaging you want to put together, who you're going to pull in, you just use that as your anchor, and it creates consistency, and it holds you accountable as a company too. Like, if this is something that practice what you preach. If this is a people first company, you gotta have a people first mindset and handle crisis in a people first way. So, and I think it also helps too when you're dealing with stakeholders, right? Because you can always go back to the mission or the purpose. You can always say, well, this is our purpose. This is how I think we should, respond, or this is how I think we should engage. This is how we should react. And it all ties back to that purpose and that mission. So it just keeps things rooted and grounded, and it makes it a little bit easier, I think, for folks who are dealing with crisis.
It reminds me of that guest we had, Stephen. I don't know if I can remember the name, but I think it was a story about a woman who had to take her daughter over to Stanford. She drove like all night to get there, and the nurse that ended up unplugging something so that the mother could sleep. And she thought she was actually just turning off the noise of the monitor, but they actually ended up unplugging the monitor. And unfortunately, the most devastating thing happened. And the hospital, instead of like trying to do damage control, just owned up to it, saying, that the nurse was trying to do the right thing by letting you sleep, but she messed up. She, in fact, actually turned off the machine.
Oh, that's devastating.
Awful. But because they were they just owned it and were authentically. And the woman didn't sue them, and they immediately offered her compensation. So they didn't have to play the game. And she ended up taking a job with the hospital to be a liaison with parents and things like that. She like 10 years later was still there. Like, the worst thing that could happen, because of the authenticity and because of the just owning
the person who was like, this person was trying to do the loving thing, and it went sideways. And so,
it wasn't. Yeah, she was really trying to do the loving thing. So it's just an example that sometimes you can mess up really bad. Yeah. And the right thing sometimes is just to own it, and whatever the consequences are with it, be ready, because some things go wrong sometimes, like in this case. And it just reminded me of that, like, sometimes the outcome will surprise you. Yeah. When instead of doing damage control, you just own it. It'll surprise you when you just own it with people.
Yep. Agreed.
This is a really good transition, Tulio, to the question we always ask people on the show is some form of, what role does love play in business? And I'm thinking, like, what role does love play in what you do? I mean,
Oh,
this is almost a good example of showing like there was this loving incident that happened and went sideways, and the best result out of it that you could get is just continue to be loving through that whole process.
yeah. And this ties into it too, like, because I was going to say love for me in a leadership role is, shows up in how I care for people regularly, like in the less crazy, less pressure times, but also when the pressure is on. Like that love and support needs to carry on the good days and the bad. Like I'm going to be there for my team. I'm going to be there for my clients regardless of whether we're having a rough time or not. And so I think, and I've heard from people in my life, my friends, family, who've had leaders who, seem to really only show like love and support for them when they're succeeding, when they are doing well, and those numbers are like, right? And they don't really give them the time of day otherwise. And to me, that speaks volumes. And I had a leader once who I love and adore, and she used to actually ask her team members what their love language was when they were hired. She would be like, "What's your love language?" And she would write it down and would make sure that she was showing up for those people based on their love language in good times and bad, right? And so I try and do the same thing now. Is I really try and, again, get to know the people who I'm working with, who are working for me, to understand what makes them tick, what's going to like get them motivated, what's going to make them feel loved and supported, and ultimately what's going to make them feel safe with me on their team, right? So I think that's, to me, it speaks volumes. You can easily show love every day. When pressure isn't high and you're in the day-to-day, but when, pressure's high and things are going wrong sometimes, you got to show that love regardless, because that's when you show your true colors ultimately. And so that hospital, that was a great segue, because that hospital scenario is an example of that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we're a little over time, but we always ask this question at the very end because we want to give the listener something tangible, something they can apply. Like if they remember just one thing from today, how can they build more empathy in their leadership style? Like one key thing. If they're going to do only one thing, what would you say that be? That is.
I would say check in on your people, and don't just check in on them from like, what are you working on? Check in. How are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? And, that goes a long way. Even if it's just a short, how are you?
Oh.
Steph, thanks for joining
Amazing.
us today on the show, and sharing, your perspective on empathy and leadership. And also, I love that last comment too about love. When people are, maybe not succeeding, right? Like you mentioned, it's easy to love someone when the transactions are coming in, and business is all about those transactions. But think about the other side of that equation too. But and thanks to our listeners for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Bliss Business Podcast.